Has everybody had an opportunity to look over the agenda? Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'd like to actually propose a small change to the agenda. I'd like to move the item from new business, which is the Cannabis Ready Committee recommendations. I'd like to move that up in the agenda so that it actually takes place before we do bylaw 400.16, because we have to make a decision on how we want to handle that bylaw. So is that clear?
Certainly is, so just an order change, not necessarily a change to the item itself.
Exactly, and then I would move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Thank you for that. And did anybody have anything else? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. And we've got some minutes from May 14th. Has everybody had an opportunity to review those? Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'll move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you very much. Any revisions or? Doesn't look like it. All those in favor? Thank you. So promptly, shortly after 5 o'clock, we have a presentation from the Lacombe District Historical Society, so we'll call upon Marie Braun to come up in the important seat at the end there and give you a few moments to get going. And you do obviously know how to use the sound system there. And the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Lacombe District Historical Society. My name is Marie Perron and I'm the Executive Director. Thank you very much for having me this evening. To talk a little bit about a recent planning document that was adopted by the Society. But before I get right into my presentation, I will keep it brief. I know you have a busy agenda this evening. So I'll touch upon some of the highlights, and if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to ask me and I can fill in any of the gaps I might have overlooked. But I'll just start by saying the Lacombe District Historical Society was founded in 1971. Our mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the history and heritage of the City of Lacombe and Lacombe County region. We own the Michener House Museum as well as the Blacksmith Shop Museum, two properties in downtown Lacombe. We are accredited by the Alberta Museum Association. This accreditation is very important to the Historical Society as it means that we meet our public trust responsibilities as a museum. It ensures to the public that we meet a minimum level of responsibility as a museum in what we do with our collections and the services that we provide our community. But it also means that we are eligible for particular grants, which are very important to the operation of the Society, as we get an annual operating grant from the AMA. We are also a service provider for the City and the County of Lacombe. We provide direct services to various departments here at the City and provide important cultural services to the community. We have an agreement, in fact, with the City of Lacombe since last year to work together on initiatives of mutual benefit with regards to our historical records. So this is an agreement between the City of Lacombe, specifically their Records Management Department, and the Historical Society to work together towards initiatives that will help both of our organizations ensure that we preserve historical records that we want insured properly, and that we share our knowledge and skills freely with each other. Next, we have a very important public trust responsibilities. As a public institution, we are grant funded and deal a lot with government funding, so it's very important that we are transparent with everything that we do financially, but also with regards to the artifacts that we have in our possession. The collection of the Historical Society is in fact not owned by the Historical Society, but by the people of Alberta. So we hold that public trust responsibility very, very highly. It's It's an important trust that we have when our donors come to the museum, that they know that artifacts or records donated to the museum are kept in perpetuity in good condition and are provided to the public, that they have access to this information and material culture. And so in addition to the public trust responsibilities, we also provide programs, events, provide research and exhibits to our community. And so last but not least, truly at the end of our day, our most important mandate is to preserve the artifacts, the archival records, but also our facilities that we own here in Lacombe. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is, in fact, is a particular study that we started last year and we finalized this year to assess the facilities of the Historical Society. Specifically the facilities we own, but also the facilities that we use for display of our collection and storage of our collection. So in 2017, the Canadian Conservation Institute was hired by the Historical Society to do a facility assessment to help us really understand where our gaps and where our deficiencies are in terms of properly caring for the material culture of our region. So we looked at things like assessing our collection storage facilities, assessing future storage needs for the collection, planning for the overall care of the collection in a new space, identifying priority areas, and understanding the need for future capital investment at the museums. The result of the Canadian Conservation Institute's assessment is a 65-page report that I have here. And it's a wonderful document. It really details the collection preservation challenges in our current facilities. It talks about recommendations, recommended improvements to our existing facilities, recommendations for collections care specifically, as well as recommendations for a purpose-built facility for the long-term preservation of our cultural heritage. The Society, in the meantime, has adopted the report as a planning document. We have also now formed a capital project committee. Their mandate is to realize the planning, fundraising, and building of the Lacombe District Museum and Archives. The report will help inform and guide the committee's work. It's really a plan to guide us going forward. So with regards to our collection preservation challenges in our existing facilities, we have currently a threat of flooding and water leak. Specifically at the Michener House, we are below the water table, so we have a pump in the back that allows us to flush our toilets in the facility. The pump has failed once in the past, and we had a flood in the museum. And so we have put in some measures in place so that it doesn't happen again. However, it is still an active risk to the collection that is stored in the basement at the Michener House Museum should the pump fail or there be a massive rainfall in Lacombe, that we could be flooded and the whole collection could be at risk. Water leaks are also a risk over at the Blacksmith Shop Museum, particularly our windows and doors and the roof are potential areas of risk. We also have extreme risk of fire damage, inadequate space for collection storage, limited environmental control, exposure to dust and pollutants, gaps in security. There's no active security system at the Blacksmith Shop Museum, and poor control of light and UV. And so these are all active risks right now to our collections. So the Historical Society does not need to wait for a new facility necessarily to start making some improvements to our existing facilities and to overall collections care. Some of the recommended improvements to our existing facilities include water detection and flood alarm. A flood alarm will be installed at the Michener House Museum to help with the pump situation. Fire alarm and suppression systems are being looked at for the Blacksmith Shop actively. Fire suppression system is not in place at either location at the moment. We have an active fire alarm at the Michener House, but none operational at the moment at the Blacksmith Shop. We need to upgrade storage and display furniture, improve environmental control so we can control humidity and temperature specifically, secure objects on open display, so if anybody has any sticky hands, things don't go missing. Install cameras and motion sensors. Cameras need to be installed at both facilities. Motion sensors only at the Blacksmith Shop. We have them currently at the Michener House. And install UV filters and conserve and maintain the existing heritage buildings that we have. So there are a number of recommendations for collections care specifically as well. Specifically, we need to continue routine inspections and maintenance of our facilities. augment emergency response plan. And so right now we have a very basic response plan, so this one needs to be far more detailed, exactly which staff is responsible for what and what needs to be done in each various type of emergency situation. Monitor and keep environmental records of collection storage spaces, conduct a security assessment, develop a lighting policy, and develop integrated pest management procedures. Finally, the document really comes together with regards to recommendations for a purpose-built facility. This is really the end goal and the end plan now for the museums, is to build something where we can truly take on our public trust responsibility and assure the public that these artifacts will indeed be preserved and maintained in perpetuity as we are responsible for. And so right now, as I mentioned, the collection is stored in the basement of the Michener House Museum. The Michener House is in fact the oldest standing building in Lacombe. It was built in 1894, and just that fact alone it is not a suitable place for collection storage. It was has been used since 1984 when a basement was put underneath the museum for collection storage here in the community. So we have about 40 years of collections worth of stuff that's in the basement. It's an amazing treasure, but it would be a real loss to this community if all of that were to be lost in a fire or a flood, which is an imminent risk right now to our building. And so that's a really big consideration and a driving factor behind the long-term plan for our organization. So specifically, the recommendations for a purpose-built facility include minimizing the risk of water damage, enhancing fire protection, providing adequate space for our collections to grow into. We have 0 room left at the Michener House to even put anything. So if we have a large donation that is offered to the museum, unfortunately, at this point in time, we will likely have to turn it away because there is no physical space to acquire that item. Our collection donations right now are luckily quite small, and people know that this is the long-term plan, so hopefully when the building is built, they'll know to come to us then. We also need to provide reliable environmental controls. It's really important that various materials are stored under various conditions. Media needs to be stored differently from textile and paper records, and right now we do not have the ability to do that. We need to protect our collection from dust and pollutants. Having a building from 1894 with the basement from 1984 with absolute humidity or no humidity or temperature control makes it very difficult for us to control these environmental factors. We also need to optimize our security, manage light and UV exposure, and ultimately protect the heritage asset during construction. So this is a very important consideration that should we build onto our facility, around our current facilities, the buildings themselves and what's inside them need to be prepared for that and protected so any vibrations don't affect the current buildings that we have, because they are important historical buildings to our community. So lastly, I just want to talk about our capital project committee that was recently formed. They meet regularly, currently on a monthly basis. They report directly to the board of directors of the society. Currently, they're submitting grant applications to implement some of the improvements recommended specifically at the blacksmith shop. So focusing on these improvements we can do now to our current facilities and also within a reasonable cost. And so we're looking at having this completely grant funded, where we will add a fire alarm, security monitoring, conservation work to our windows, doors, and machinery. So this will help with some of the water leaking issues we have and security issues, as well as fire alarm system, which will help diminish the threat of fire. So lastly, I just want to thank you for your time and open the floor for any questions at this point in time. Again, just reminding you that we're not asking for anything today. We just want to inform you about the study we've done and the plan that we have to guide us forward. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Marie. We appreciate it. Any questions from council at this time? Go ahead, Councillor Godson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Thanks, Maria. It was a good presentation. Now, ultimately you're looking for a new building, correct?
Down the road.
Down the road. And in discussions we've had previously, that building would be located where?
The location so far that has been selected and also recommended by the Canadian Conservation Institute is actually the property around the Michener House Museum. It'll allow us to build a facility that's large enough to suit our own needs, while also being able to enhance the existing facility, making it wheelchair accessible and being able to consolidate our resources onto one site. we start to expand to multiple sites, we have to staff and operate, and we look at larger operating costs in the long term. So we're looking at ways that we can minimize the long-term operational costs while maximizing the benefit to our community. We'd be really turning the Michener House into a remarkable landmark. It'd be a real attraction for people to come and visit. It would really improve the profile of the society, being on that footprint. But also, a purpose-built facility is highly recommended over a renovation. The CCI Conservation Institute emphasizes that as well in their report, that to retrofit an existing facility would probably end up being more costly and inefficient rather than building something from scratch that purposely suits our needs.
Now that building, is that land that you currently have? You own the land there now, the Historical Society?
We currently own the property that the Michener House is located on, but we would in fact want to enter into discussion with the City of Lacombe to look potentially at acquiring the lot next to ours, which is a parking lot owned by the City of Lacombe. And as part of our request for assistance with this project, down the road we would look at potentially having that lot given to the Historical Society as part of that request. That would allow us to build a larger facility, which would have a long-term benefit to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. I was just curious, given that the existing structure is built in 1884, how is it you plan on adding on a modern facility and keep in mind the architectural value of the existing structure?
That's an excellent question. We actually have a lot of guidelines from the province on how to build a complementary facility. We are not the only ones who have ever done this. Luckily, there are other examples out there on how to add on to an existing facility. The new building would in fact become the new entrance and becomes a primary building. The Michener House would be attached by the rear. The back of the museum is not designated for heritage, and so we would be allowed, because it was an addition put on to the original structure, to attach to the rear of it, and that way we could connect the two buildings together.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. For some of you, you may be aware or not, but Marie will be leaving us. She has accepted a position recently. This is brand new news. And she's heading to Ottawa. And so I just wanted to talk to council about, Marie has been here, I think 5 or 7 years.
7 years now, yeah.
And certainly her efforts have solidified and brought the historical and cultural component for the cities to a very high profile, and we're certainly on solid ground. So I just wanted to acknowledge your efforts and wish you the best.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I expect that council wishes the same on your future endeavors, and we appreciate the work that you've put in to date at our city. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to work in this community.
Councilor Gibbs?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I will make a motion to accept the report or presentation as information, please.
Thank you for that. Not seeing any other lights, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Was there some additional mailbox items that we could swing back into? We do have a few minutes before we move into our public hearing. Sure. Does anybody have any specific items to go through on the councilor mailbox at this time? We'll give you one to catch up with them. So we've got some board minutes from Mary Seymour Public Library. Anybody have any questions on that one? And there was a note from Nicholas Phelps in support of the Gold Bus. And then there was a letter from Richard Palliser regarding review of the land use bylaw. Any of those items?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'm talking too much. I did actually have a brief comment on this last letter, actually, just before I move that we accept these for information. The letter in regards to the land use bylaw. I just would like to state that I think that it's a very good idea that we're having the conversation. It's not necessarily meant to be interpreted that things are going to change, but it just means we're going to have a good conversation with, I would hope, some community input. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that being said, I will go ahead and move that we accept mailbox for information. Thank you.
Thank you. With that particular letter in mind, I did have an opportunity to speak to the writers. I'm sure many of you had, and there was certainly some misconceptions that were cleared up since then, but I don't think that it's necessarily appropriate that we discuss the implications of the changes at this time, but what this letter did allude to is, in fact, incorrect, I think would be the best way to put it. So, because I had an opportunity to speak with him and to clear up some items as well. So, anyway, we've got a motion before us to accept mailbox as information. All those in favor? Thank you. So given that we do have a few minutes left, I'm going to jump over to page 2 and go through our some general administrative items, our parade requests. And see that he is not here. Hey, there he is. Welcome, Geek. Come on up. We're just going to go through some parade requests here. If you have a moment.
That was fast, yeah.
Okay.
So, this evening council is asked to consider invitations to neighboring community parades in 2018. Your confirmation is required to provide a timely response to these host communities. Just as a little bit of backup information, the parade float has been used to interact with people both within and beyond Lacombe. The float was used as a promotional tool for business attraction, community pride, and brand awareness. Past practice has been for 2 councillors to attend parades, provide support and maximize exposure. As the float has begun to age, participation was limited to Lacombe Days and Light Up the Night last year. Council has the option to attend these parades and others throughout the year as dignitaries without the float, if you so wish. The lifespan of the float was estimated at 3 to 5 years, and we are now on to year 7. Consideration for renewal or replacement will be provided during this year's budget deliberations. And just as an FYI, the budget was about $50,000 back in 2011, and that secured about an entry-level grade float for us. A total of 5 people are recommended for each parade. Again, past practice has been not to submit an application if this threshold is not achieved. Administration recommends that Council accept the 2018 parade request as information and confirm that the parades they wish to attend. That I'm open for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Key. We appreciate the information. Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. I'm already committed to Stetler Parade, and that's not on here. I'm curious about that. And then secondly, I'm surprised Pinoca's not on the list. What's the story there?
So these were invitations that I had received. And so if they came directly to you and didn't make it to me, that would be why they didn't show up on the list.
Councillor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So the list that's here, all of them would like to see the float there? Is that what you're suggesting, these communities?
Usually we receive an invite for a dignitary, but they're appreciative if we can bring the float at some point. So it is actually directed towards a dignitary. The float is not a necessity.
Okay, and just, I know you have here a total of 5 people are recommended for each parade. I know we've done, well, you know we've done lots where I've gone to some where it's just me and one other with the float. One of us drives it, one of us walks. I guess to clarify, it's you can probably do it with 2 people, but it takes staff is what the thing that we're going to have to clarify here. I mean, usually 2 or 3 guys go out with a couple of trucks and a couple of trailers and they set it up, and then we go do the parade, so to speak, and then they help us pack up and away it goes. So I was just trying to clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So this is something I've thought of before, well before I ever thought of being a councillor. I was always curious why we would have a float and just have, members of council, maybe members of administration. Like, we're trying to brand ourselves as a community that's family, and yet we don't have, many of us have children or grandchildren. I think that would be, I'm just putting it out there as a proposal, if council is, interested in that perhaps we sort of expand who we have, marching with the parade, because I think that reflects our community and that says who we are. So I'd like to put that out there for discussion.
Certainly, thank you for that. I know in the past, not necessarily family members, but certainly it's been open to community groups. I don't believe that the uptake was stellar. I would suggest, but perhaps you can enlighten us on that, Pete.
I would agree that it wasn't stellar in the past. However, it doesn't mean that we could look at that again. We have opened it to family members as well. Typically, that seems to happen more at light of the night, I would say. Again, I think you get the response that you're talking about, where it's more community-oriented at that point too. So I think we might be able to open that back up to the community and community organizations, and quite honestly, probably other family members.
And so were you expecting answers this evening as to participation of these particular venues, or?
I think acceptance, sorry.
Is there a particular date when you need, I mean, some of these are coming up relatively soon.
Once this week.
So I expect you've got a date that you need to know by.
Yeah, so obviously there's one that needs to be responded to immediately. So if anybody has any interest in that one, please let us know. But yeah, what I thought this evening was accepting it as information and then contacting me directly regarding your willingness to participate.
Councillor Jacobson?
This is maybe a question more for Councillor Conniff or Director Vaughn. Is it fairly standard practice to accept all invitations that come in to a parade?
Neither of them seem to be willing to jump in, so I will, and I would suggest that
No, I jump in.
so that in fact it's quite the opposite. We usually receive far more requests than what we're able to participate in. I think would be the play way of it.
And sorry for being the skeptic. I fail to see the real benefit of us going much further out of our immediate circle, to be frank with you. I mean, I'm all happy to go and represent and brand and all that, but I at least like to have a discussion of like necessity of going to Bowden Days or Penhold Fall Festival. It's not even a community we interact with that much, to be honest with you.
Point taken. I think that it might be more beneficial for us to see who's interested in participating in the particular venues rather than discussing the merits of any particular one in public. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I've been part of Lacombe Days for 5 years. I guess my thought is support those that support us for our parade. You know, if you want those to participate. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but I don't ever recall Penhold or Bowden. And Clive and Eck will participate, Sylvan Lake, Pinoka, and so forth. So I think Alex too, but my thought is support those that support our event, and no disrespect to the others. They're welcome, but I mean, I just, yeah, if you want, as a host, I guess it's just kind of a return is my history as upbringing, I guess, so that's my thought.
Certainly point well taken. I think that once the list is circulated, we'll have a pretty good idea from the requests that he receives back of participation, interest in all these, and we can take it from there. It was Councillor Booster who brought up the fact that there are some venues missing from this list. I think that I have a couple more as well that were intended to make it to your desk, but obviously did not, which is fine, but perhaps you can just see that that list is updated prior to it going out. And we've got some input here. Councillor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Now, we don't have to take the float, right? No. So, I mean, participation, because if we take the float, we're looking at costs involved, correct?
Depending on the response, of course, right? So if there was a number of people, so that may be a way to look at it, is if there's a positive response to one or two of the parades in particular, maybe that's where we send the float to.
And Councillor Hoekstra.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I was in contact with Ross regarding the Stettler Parade. Should I be in contact with you to find out more details? Like what's the protocol here, if you don't mind? Oh.
So I think a point of order, or the most orderly way to proceed, would be if you could send the information to Ross, and Ross will get that to Guy. But if you could indicate to Guy which parades you would be available for, and then we can make a determination on whether or not the float will go depending on the interest level in that particular parade. And then thinking about timelines, as we've talked about, these are imminent, and so we're hoping that you would be able to get that information to us by the end of the week. Is that good?
Short of the one that's immediate, I think we need to respond to one by tomorrow. So if there's anybody, to me that feels like that would be a dignitary that would be going to that, because that's such a short list.
So just as a reminder, there's three of us that definitely will not be attending that one. So if anybody's interested in going, please let me know tonight or tomorrow before noon at the latest. Councillor Connick.
Well, thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just for further information, you alluded to costs, Councillor Gullickson. What has happened in the past too is that councillors, I know the mayor, I think even the mayor at one point in his first term, but councillors will sometimes pull a trailer too with their truck. I know Councillor Bausma used to pull a trailer out. Councillor Foster would pull the trailer out. I don't know if you did it any one time, Mayor Creasy, pulled the trailer out to a parade or a location. So then if one councillor is pulling a trailer, then city staff take it. So the costs are fairly minimal. That's just something I'm just throwing out there. It's just for information. As for these smaller communities, they're always excited when we show up. I mean, maybe Bowden and Pennold don't come to our parade, but they sure like it when we come to theirs. And I know the community there, it's a huge marketing thing. I always thought this was, to be perfectly honest, I always thought at the beginning when we started doing this that this was kind of a, not a waste of time and money, but it was always, well, why are we going to these communities? But you get out there with the float, and the float is nice. It's a nice float. And you always hear up and down the streets, people always take pictures and say, hey, that's a terrific float. So in terms of marketing the community, I always think it's a huge win. Like, I think it reflects really well in the community. The float looks really good. And I know a lot of these smaller communities really think, what's in it for us? But they appreciate when they come in the community. If at the end of the day someone in Pennold says, my goodness, that float's awesome, I'm going to move to Lacombe, hey, that's a win for us. But I don't know if that happens or not, but it's a great marketing tool. So, if we can make it to some of these, great. I get it. Last year we only went to a couple because I know in the first year when that float came out, we were all gung-ho, and there used to be lots of participation, and it slowly waned over time, I'll be honest. But if we can make it to some, that's great. But yeah, we need the full list, obviously. So.
Thank you. So we've got a report there. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Unless I've missed it, I don't think anybody's actually moved that we accept the parade request as information and confirm the parades that council will attend.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Thank you. So we're a few minutes late. We'll move into our public hearing pertaining to planning and development services for bylaw 400.14, the rezoning in Metcalfe, future development to R1 and R4. So it's 5:35, and I will declare the statutory public hearing open, and will state that the hearing is held pursuant to Section 7. Excuse me. To Section 7, 8, 230, 606, and 692 of the Municipal Government Act 2000 as amended. And at this time, I will ask our legislative coordinator to confirm the details of the hearing.
Mayor Creasy, point of order, I need to declare pecuniary interest.
Thank you very much. You're excused.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Mayor Creasy and Council, the purpose of this public hearing is to allow the general public to provide input to the proposed amending bylaw 400.14 to rezone Lot 1, Block 4, Plan 1820846 from future designation District FD to residential mixed district R4, and Lot 11, Block 4, Plan 1820846 from future designation District FD to residential detached district R1, as shown on the advertised map. So for Section 606 of the NPA, requirements for advertising this notice was advertised in the Lacombe Express Thursday, May 17th and Thursday, May 24th, and the written submissions were received.
So at this time, I'll state that all persons giving oral presentations today are to clearly state their name, and that presentations are to be brief and to the point. And first up is our Development Officer, Deb Bonnet. If you can walk us through this item, please.
All right, we received the application to rezone the 2 lots located within Metcalfe Ridge. Phase 1 of Metcalfe Ridge was marginally expanded, and with the re-subdivision resulted in 3 lots, 2 of which require the rezoning, 1 to R1 and 1 to R4.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would ask anyone wishing to speak in favor is welcome to do so at this time. My expectation is that there won't be a rush to the microphone, but we do have to take a moment to give people an opportunity. So is there anyone wishing to speak in favor? And I will call the third and final time. And is there anyone that wishes to speak opposed to this item? No one's rushing forward either. We'll move on to any person deemed to be affected who wishes to be heard on this particular item can do so now. An equal amount of participation there. Does anyone in council have any questions or concerns on this particular item? If not, it is 5:40 and I will declare the public hearing closed at this time. So after that heavily debated public input session, we'll move down to bylaw 400.14, the Metcalfe rezoning future development to R1 and R4 for consideration for second and third reading. And Manager Bonnet, if you could walk us through this part.
All right. As I said, there's only 2 lots to be rezoned. 3 were included in the subdivision, and the notifications were mailed out to the adjacent landowners on April 24th, and it was advertised on the web and in the paper on the 17th and the 24th. Our recommendation is to grant second and third reading to the application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ross.
I will move that council give a second reading to bylaw 400.14 for the rezoning of Lot 1, Block 4, Plan 1820846 from feature designation district to residential mixed district R4, and Lot 11, Block 4, Plan 1820846 from feature designation to residential detached district R1.
Could you repeat that for us, please? Thank you for that, Councillor Ross.
Just should have said.
Do you have any input on for second reading? Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So, I thought this was part of phase 1. You're saying it wasn't?
Yes.
Do we have a picture of what phase 1 looked like? Like Ross, was it just that yellow there below the red that was phase 1, Deb? Manager Bonnet, sorry?
It is the, just the area above the green. There's the R4 and R1 right in there.
Right.
And they just marginally expanded it. So there was a re-subdivision and consolidation and subdivision. And so part of it was zoned future development, so required the rezoning. So a portion of the lots the further north lots, that one, they re-subdivided that lot adjacent to it once the consolidation took place. And then expanded the lower one too.
Okay, no, I was just trying to remember which was phase 1 and what part of it was. That's fine.
Okay, that is outlined there as phase 1. I believe the upper lots also.
Director Thompson, did you have some information to add?
Yeah, just to clarify, when this initial phase 1 subdivision was created, the lots were laid out just short of that property line, the dotted blue line on the left map. And so the entire of the magenta boundary and then that portion of the blue smaller boundary above it were just part of the remaining parcel. And so the developer has looked at that and then has decided to incorporate those lots into phase 1. And so he's just amending a couple small slivers of land that weren't included in the initial subdivision here. And so because they were designated future district, the rezoning here is required to allow them to develop them, just like the adjacent lots.
Thanks, Director Thompson. So for these slivers of land that are abutting the parcel on the left-hand map there, that is not part of Metcalf Ridge at this particular point in time, is it?
It's within the development boundary. The subdivision, it is part of Metcalf Ridge, yes.
But under different ownership than the color portion here.
Oh, sorry. If you're referring to the blue boundary area that doesn't have any colors to it, yes, that is not within. That is a third party, another landowner.
Thank you very much. That would likely cause some of this issue as well, then, to make better use of the property up to the limits of their current ownership.
Yeah, when the developer initially laid out the lotting worked out such that that property line straddled where the initial lot layout would have been. And so instead of creating a smaller lot initially, he just elected to not subdivide that last parcel. And so if he owned both, he would have, I'm sure, would have continued it along. But in this case, because of that property line kind of straddled 2 parcels, initially he left that as a remainder parcel. And has since revisited that and decided to create these 2 parcels here.
Thank you. Any additional input? If not, we've got second reading before us for bylaw 400.14. All those in favor? Thank you. Councillor Clark?
And I would so move third reading.
Thank you for that. Would you care to read that out for us, or? Everybody's, I think everybody understands what the bylaw is. Is there any final input? If not, third reading, all those in favor for bylaw 400.14? Thank you. So I think we'll move into Planning and Development Services item here for our Cannabis Readiness Committee recommendations. And I believe Director Thompson will be heading this up.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Tonight we'll be presenting the results of the recommendations of the Cannabis Readiness Committee. Just to remind Council, the upcoming legalization of cannabis will affect the city in 3 areas, including land use, community standards, and human resources within the city of Lacombe as an organization. The committee met regularly as a whole and as subsidiary task forces in March and April to formulate recommendations on Lacombe's approach to the legalization of recreational cannabis. The committee's recommendations were on display at the 2018 Spring Trade Show City booth for public comment, and they are also attached to this report. So starting with land use recommendations, this is an area that primarily focuses on retail sales of recreational cannabis, as well as the production and distribution of cannabis within the city. The committee has proposed a less restrictive land use regulation than what is being proposed by other municipalities in the region. The goal of this is to provide a favorable environment to attract business from an emerging industry to Lacombe. The committee has taken an approach whereby both the production and distribution of cannabis as well as the retail sales of cannabis is located on a land use zoning approach. So we would identify where those uses are permitted and discretionary within the land use bylaw, and then subject to an applicant meeting the conditions in the land use bylaw, they'd be allowed to locate anywhere within those zonings. So in summary, the committee's recommendations are listed in the report here, as well as the accompanying maps that are attached to this report. These are the same maps that were on display at the trade show. One area that I'd like to highlight is that administration, its preference would be that land use bylaw revisions related to the legalization of cannabis be done under one land use bylaw amendment if possible. This makes it more straightforward to administer. It also makes it easier to, or more clear to communicate to the public all the changes that we're making to the land use side as a result of the legalization of cannabis. And so, should council endorse the recommendations tonight, we are recommending that later on in the agenda there's an item related to the bylaw, specifically definitions within the land use bylaw. We're recommending that be tabled and we come forward with a more complete, say, a land use bylaw recommendation that includes all of the recommendations. What can happen here is if council decides that there's more work, or that there's some more work required, or would like to see some further consultation, then we want to make sure that if that process takes longer and perhaps even takes us into past the legalization of cannabis, that we aren't open to some confusing interpretations of our land use bylaw when cannabis is legal. So for instance, somebody wanting to open a cannabis retail store may, in the absence of any specific detail in our land use bylaw, may be able to say that they're a normal retail use and be located anywhere retail use can be located. Or someone who were to open up a company wanted to start a production business in Lacombe, and then falling under, say, a greenhouse type use. And so what the definitions allow us to do is clearly identify the difference between a cannabis retail store and a normal retail store. And what the bylaw as presented in the memo show that creates those definitions, but it doesn't put it anywhere in the bylaw. So that means that effectively is a stopgap to say, we acknowledge that these uses exist, but they're not allowed anywhere in the community. So that will give council time, if needed, to revisit the recommendations and still not create an awkward environment where we could have uses where they're not really intended to be without those definitions. And so our preference is for if council endorses these recommendations tonight, we do one big bylaw amendment that includes all of the amendments, including the zoning ones and the definitions. If council prefers recommendations tonight, then we have the bylaw 400.16, I believe, in the agenda today, and we would ask council to get first reading on that process to get the definitions in the bylaw. So moving on to community standards. The community standard, the Cannabis Readiness Committee has proposed recommendations that closely align the public consumption of cannabis with that of liquor. Furthermore, the committee recommends the smoking of tobacco be restricted in some public places, primarily due to the smell of both cannabis and tobacco being considered undesirable for non-participating bystanders in public places. And the recommendation ensures both are prohibited in parks and other city lands. The committee has also made recommendations regarding raising the awareness of existing community supports and related funding. The goal of these recommendations is to recognize that addictions issues exist in Lacombe and supporting new and existing addictions supports by using a portion of any cannabis excise tax received by the city to fund programs focused on reducing the prevalence and harm of addiction in Lacombe. The recommendations, again, are included in the report as well as in the documents. It's important to note, though, that while the federal government has communicated that it intends for a large portion of the cannabis excise tax funding to flow through to municipalities, we don't have any details on that from the provincial government, so it'll likely be a number of years before we actually see the money being flowed through to municipalities from the provincial government. Should council endorse these recommendations, administration will work with the committee to create a cannabis readiness implementation and monitoring plan to carry them out. And so by adopting these recommendations, it doesn't make them into law right away. We have to follow up with actual bylaw amendments or specific action items to back up council's endorsement of the committee's recommendations. In terms of human resources, this work is ongoing. It's largely focused internally with and to do with administrative directives and changes to the organization, internal policies. But if there's anything that does require council's endorsement, that will be brought forth for consideration at that time. Just a comment on public consultation. Part of the committee's mandate was to review, discuss, and debate the need for and scope of public engagement efforts around cannabis legalization. However, after discussing it, the committee decided that it would not be advantageous to proceed with any public consultations beyond the trade show display, as well as the website. There's a website, lacombe.ca/cannabis, that has some information as well, without council's approval. The committee was sensitive to the fact that council should take a look at these recommendations first before we go any further with public consultation. And so we're looking for an indication from council on whether further public consultation is required or if the recommendations can be adopted as listed. Just to tie it back, if any bylaw approval process does in and of itself require public consultation, as seen tonight, it would be a public hearing. And so if there certainly is that level of public consultation will occur at minimum as we go through the actual implementation of these recommendations. So in the report, we've also highlighted a number of strategic plan references. There are a number of references in this draft strategic plan which are favorable to the recommendations of the Cannabis Readiness Committee. The only one that I'll really comment on here today is the reference to the first one being neutral or favorable to this Cannabis Readiness Committee's recommendation, and speaking specifically to the allocation of the cannabis excise tax money to municipalities. The reason why it's listed as neutral to or favorable to is because if the province decides that there is a blanket formula that applies to all municipalities and they get the money, say, on a per capita basis, this priority is more neutral. It doesn't really, it's not something that would be considered an alternative revenue source. We would get it either way. If the province decides to develop a formula that is more tied to how open the community is to cannabis legalization, or some other formula where realistically a community that, say, is very closed off to cannabis legalization versus another community, if that first community wouldn't receive limited funding, but other communities would receive more, if there's a formula like that, then certainly this initiative or the adoption of these recommendations could be considered favorable in terms of an actual alternative revenue source for the city. With that, administration's recommendation is to for the council endorse the recommendation of the Cannabis Readiness Committee as presented, and the council direct administration to prepare a single land use bylaw, including new and modified definitions for cannabis and cannabis-related uses, and the remainder of the land use bylaw revisions required to enact the land use recommendations of the Cannabis Readiness Committee. That answers your questions.
Thank you very much for that, Director Thompson. I want to thank you and your team and Councillors Jacobson and Hibbs for putting forth what I would term a very common sense approach to this issue that was thrust upon us. I've had an opportunity to speak with a lot of elected representatives from other communities, and some of the methods that they're contemplating using are far outside of what I would suggest is inclusion here. So thank you for taking a reasonable approach to this. I appreciate it. Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I just have some concerns over the possible mapping. As I recall, Winks was in yellow, if I'm correct, which I thought it was. Is it still? So definition being that can be a possible location, that close to a school? Is that a possibility then? Or somebody can answer that?
Councillor Hibbs, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I will gladly address that as one of the councillors on that committee. So yes, you are correct. That is an area that is identified as discretionary. Now, of course, when something is discretionary, it has to come before, in this case, MPC, to get approval, to proceed with that development. And if that's the case, they're going to have to make a pretty solid case to that group, and for the exact reasons that you're identifying, that would probably be fairly hard to do. I mean, the other option is to start making a bunch of exclusions in certain areas, but what the committee tried to do was just go by zoning. That's what we use as a basis for deciding where it was permitted, where it was discretionary, and where it would be allowed at all. So that just happens to be a parcel of land that is zoned for that.
Thank you. And pardon me, but another area of concern Jake Schellenberg brought forward was the 50th Street option. I think that was another one. Just scroll up a bit more. Was it not?
It's all green.
Pardon me?
It's all green.
Up. So green meaning that is obviously another option of locations. Permitted. I guess that's just my personal feeling when you're around a youth counseling orientated facility, and I think 50th Street is already quite limited in parking and so forth, and I guess I think our options of locations could be shortened with, I guess, that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Jacobson.
So one of the things that's really important to differentiate here, and this is something the committee had to get their head wrapped around, because there was quite a few committee members who frankly came in with basically your identical concerns, not the least of which was the Winks location, which I'd just like to point out, in addition to Councillor Hibbs' comments, was, it's a discretionary use to sell alcohol at that location, and there should be just as much concern about selling alcohol to kids in the location as cannabis, right? So we really tried to mimic that philosophy. And the other thing is to differentiate between retail and consumption, right? So there's a real, it's subtle, it's a substantial difference. So retail means you can sell it, but you can't consume it, right? And if you look at what we did for community standards, we went like zero tolerance for public consumption. So in other words, absolutely, you can buy and vend just like you could buy and vend alcohol, right? But you cannot consume it public, right? And that, that's the real dichotomy I think we created that really speaks to responsibility of both vending and consuming. So I know it's kind of tough to get your head wrapped around, we may end up disagreeing in the day, but I genuinely believe that having this, as the mayor said, common sense approach to the retail component of it and being absolutely strict on the consumption component of it speaks to a lot of concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Further to Councillor Ross's comments, I'm just, I think a lot of the recommendations are good, but I'm going to throw out there that maybe all retail sales should be discretionary. Just not only for the reasons that Councillor Ross has alluded to, but I just don't want this community to become, we've got 10 liquor stores and now we're going to have 10 cannabis locations. It just seems to me the way to curb that is that it be all discretionary, so that every application comes to MPC. I know I don't want to throw a lot of work on MPC, but I just, yes, you can make the argument the market will dictate and blah blah blah, but for some reason we're supporting 9 liquor stores in this town. I can't figure that out. But anyways, I just, I realize it's just first reading, but I'm going to struggle with this for a little bit because I don't know if it should just be permitted carte blanche in all the green areas. I think, quite frankly, it should be all yellow in terms of retail myself, because I'd like to see this controlled a little bit. I don't want to see, the street that Councillor Ross is alluding to, we could have 3 cannabis locations on it. I mean, I don't know. That's just food for thought. I know it's just first reading tonight, but.
Thank you. Perhaps we could have a member of the committee speak towards the provincial involvement too. I don't think that anybody's suggesting that it's an absolute free-for-all because there's a certain amount of provincial and federal regulations that must be followed in addition to where we allow them to open up shop. So who would care to address that and Councillor Connick's concerns?
So in terms of the provincial regulation around locations, the proposed the legislation identifies certain, say, base level buffers around different types of uses that that establishes kind of a no-go zone, at least for the retail cannabis. But it also allows for municipalities to vary those up or down as they see fit. That benefits the community. There are extensive recommendations or actually requirements at the provincial level to ensure that both the stores meet the security requirements of the AGLC, as well as they meet the signage and advertising requirements. They've been very sensitive to the types of advertising, the types of signage that occurs at these stores. I don't have all of the details, but it's certainly the theme is that to keep it very neutral. You can't make any claims of medical advantage or have, I believe it's even a cannabis leaf, things like that. It has to be very, very neutral signage and marketing materials on the buildings themselves. So I'm not sure if that addresses the question, but certainly speaks somewhat to differential regulation.
Thank you, Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So I just want to address a few comments. So one of the things about making it, discretionary versus permitted, all that does is now make it appear before MPC. MPC won't have the mandate unless you guys tell it to limit the amount of, stores. So we could have 10, presentations asking for a cannabis store, and 10 presentations, assuming they meet the criteria, will probably be granted. So, the comment is made, why do we have 10 liquor stores? Well, because there's enough people, obviously, that are buying alcohol. So unless people stop doing that, that's the way it's going to be. Same thing with, again, market is going to dictate. If this community can support 10, then it's going to support 10. So I don't understand why moving it to discretionary, other than making a whole lot more work for people, hoops to jump through that are frankly unnecessary. I would definitely speak in favor of leaving it as permitted. And then also, just to address, again, we have a location downtown, as was mentioned. I think it's important to recognize that you do have a youth center in a commercial area across the street or even next to places that serve alcohol. There's sandwich boards all the time on the sidewalk that are promoting, alcohol. Like, this isn't anything that's particularly exceptional. I know it's tough to wrap head around, cannabis, because it's kind of new and different, I guess, sort of. But I think we do have to sort of keep it in perspective and just sort of look at this, as a product that's going to be highly controlled. It is just retail sales. It isn't consumption. I think that is a very important, distinction.
Thank you, Councillor Jacobson.
Another point to make too, to Councillor Hibbs' point, is again, just think of it from a public enjoyment perspective. What's more detrimental to the youth in the downtown area? People who have purchased cannabis in a retail store and are taking it home, or people who've been out at Uglies or Cilantro and Chive and are stumbling around. Just consider that for a second. So there is, there's prejudice you have to consider with that too. When you think about, and you don't think about it because obviously you're used to alcohol. It's been in your life your entire year-old existence. You don't think about that, right? This is something new. So it's really been, and it was the work of the committee to really tackle those preconceived ideas of what acceptable public behavior is, and then put that into context of what we're trying to do here. And I also would, the whole idea of making the whole thing discretionary was batted around a lot. Like it was in the beginning, a lot of people wanted to go that route, and I would like to point out that actually the Chief of Police, from a public safety perspective, is in full support of this model, the permitted use and how we mapped it out there. And I do believe that there is the strong argument you made for allowing the market to dictate. And I know people kind of bat their eyes at that or say whatever, but truly, cannabis is already here, fellow councillors. It's being consumed. All this is going to do is legalize it, and the only people who are going to be negatively affected by these laws are people who weren't following them anyway in the first place. So just sort of keep that in mind. And it sort of seems counterintuitive to say, well, I guess we're going to make cannabis free for all, but I think it's genuinely a boogeyman we're all a little bit afraid of here, and that when the dust settles and you see the 2 or 3 stores, or maybe it's 7 or 8 that pop up in town, as long as they're following the bylaws as they're presented, I genuinely don't think you're going to have anything other than law-abiding citizens. So, and if we go the route of trying to regulate everything, I think we're going to create a bit of a bureaucratic monster for ourselves and put our MPC, frankly, in a position where they're trying to, do a job, where they're trying to understand, will of council and kind of go from there. And I just genuinely think, as Councillor Hibbs said, it's best to just make the decision and let the market go from there.
I think I'm going to jump in there for one additional question and just ask, what was the rationale behind having all of the properties along Highway 12 to the east of Highway 2A as discretionary as opposed to proposed?
To the east of 2A or to the west of 2A?
To the east.
The east is permitted.
They're all secret.
No, they're all in yellow.
They're all.
Are you looking at production?
Cannabis retail sales. Discretionary use, all along Highway, right from 36. Along Highway 12.
Oh, at least it's Highway 2A.
Sorry, 12 to the east of going east from 2A.
Well, to be honest, Mayor, I don't know, because I was in favor of making them permitted if we were going to be permitted discretionary. But that was ultimately what the the committee decided would be appropriate.
Okay. Fair enough. it just seems odd to me that it is discretionary, and then we've got some areas to the south end of the city along Highway 2A that are in fact permitted uses, and they are very close to residential areas, which I'm not saying it's the end of the world, I'm just wondering the difference. So, Director Thompson?
So some of the discussion at the committee level was around bringing businesses into Lacombe and attracting this new emerging industry. And so certainly some discussions occurred around Lacombe downtown. How can we take advantage of a new industry and leverage Lacombe's existing downtown? And so there was a distinguish made between permitted uses and discretionary uses in terms of the retail sales level to, I guess, demonstrate that permitted uses downtown could cause some redevelopment of existing sites or some renovations of buildings downtown, or some investment further investment into the downtown. And so there's a distinction between what levels of regulation would be whatever to facilitate that or encourage that.
Councilor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I respect the committee's work, and you did a wonderful job and great job at doing this, but I still think, and I consider myself to be a open-minded and partial person, but you still got to have a perception of wrapping around the whole community, and I think a little more restriction upon it. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense within a minimal distance of a school, that being Winks, or a youth group that's trying to possibly support these young people in I just think the perception of that image could be different, and so forth. So, and I'm one vote of 7, but I don't agree with some of the areas that could be a little more restrictive. I know that you're trying to the definitions of consumption versus purchase. I think it could be 50th Street and Winks. I don't agree with. So I'm just one. So that's my opinion.
Councilor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. First and foremost, I'm a capitalist at heart, don't get me wrong. And, this notion of let the market dictate, okay, that's all well and good. Personally, I don't want us to be a community. I think we have too many liquor stores. I think there are many in this community who would argue we have too many liquor stores. And I don't want to be a community of 9 liquor stores and 9 cannabis stores. Yes, MPC, if it's discretionary, can approve all of them, I suppose. I would just like to throw out there, I know, for example, on secondary suites, you can only build, I think it's 12% on any given block. You can have a secondary suite. After you've hit that, it goes to MPC, and they can or cannot, for example, approve another secondary street or secondary suite. I challenge the idea of maybe we couldn't have something, you can have 1 cannabis store per 2,500 population. So in theory, then we could have 4 in this community, and that's it. And then if an application comes in after that, then it goes to MPC, and they decide if we do indeed need another cannabis store. It wouldn't hurt my feelings if we had that type of controls in place for all the liquor stores. I get it. It's capitalism. It creates jobs, but I wish there was some sort of control, because I just don't want to see. Kudos to small business and free enterprise, but I don't want to see it. Let's become a pot liquor town.
I appreciate your comments, Councilor Connick, but the thing that I struggle with this, I don't think that it's our place to bring this into a moral issue. For me, it's a fairness one, and I expect that if they were relying on you and I for sales, there would be none. But the simple fact of the matter is there is apparently a demand for this, and it's up to us to go about implementing it. And I think if we have 1 store or 100 stores, I don't think we're necessarily going to sell any more or less of it, in my opinion. But Councilor Gullickson.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I agree 100%. I don't think it matters if there's 50 stores. The consumption's going to be the same. And I think that's where we have to focus most of our efforts, is on controlling the consumption and ensuring that it's consumed in the ways we want it to be consumed, and enforce those laws. Because I think initially what's going to happen is that there's going to be some people that would like to consume it everywhere. And I think it's up to us to ensure that that doesn't happen and it doesn't get out of control. And there's many issues involved with that. I mean, there's, are we going to have, we have beer gardens, are we going to have pot gardens, and all those questions that have been asked. And I think that's the area where we can do more good than trying to control the retail side, because I do believe the market will control the retail numbers. And I'm sure you'll see some start up and go out of business, and others come in and so on. But I think right now, if we go with our existing zoning, and I believe the maps were designed that way, correct? I think that would be a fair way of controlling it a little bit, and let the market handle it, and focus our efforts on controlling the consumption and making sure people do it the proper way.
Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So given that, I would like to make that first motion that Council endorse the recommendations of the Cannabis Ready Committee as presented, being that those are going to form the changes that are going to be brought by administration in the bylaw. Of course, recognizing that we have the opportunity at that time to discuss when the bylaw is brought to us, do we make any changes, or is it good as is? For example, your concern with the one property, that can be addressed at that time. But I would love to hear support from Council with those recommendations made from the Cannabis Committee. Sorry, just to be extra clear, I am moving that Council endorse the recommendations of the Cannabis Readiness Committee as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Hibbs. Any additional comments or concerns at this time? Councillor Connick?
I'll be real quick. And this is just talking about retail. We haven't even tackled nuisance yet, as Councillor Gullickson has alluded to, and I think that's going to be a huge problem. This is nothing compared to that.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Just to be clear, so you can change the designated areas after this first reading, or are we going to go by what the current proposal of the sites as is?
Director Thompson, perhaps you could enlighten us as to the process.
So what we're asking Council to do tonight is to endorse the recommendations of the Cannabis Readiness Committee. That includes the land use and the community standards recommendations. That motion in and of itself is not creating any new bylaws, or is not creating any regulation. It gives administration the guidance to move forward with the land use and move forward with the land use amendments and the subsequent bylaws to support the community standards recommendations. And so Councillor Hibbs referred to future opportunity to refine some of the details, specifically around the living property, for instance. And so when we do bring forward the land use bylaw amendments, that could be something specifically debated at the time. We still have to go through that land use amendment process. So that is what's being asked here tonight. The bylaw that is in the agenda, if Council were to endorse the committee's recommendations as presented, we would ask Council to table that bylaw, and we would come back with one single bylaw that includes the definitions as well as all of the rezoning items that are included in the committee's recommendations. And so hopefully that can clarify something.
Thank you. Director Vaughn?
So just in terms of process, if Council were to endorse these recommendations of the committee, that will lead us to return to Council with a bylaw. And that bylaw is going to articulate in legal terms all the intentions behind these recommendations. And so it's at that point when Council debates the bylaw, and there'll be a public hearing for that bylaw. That is when particular discussions around specific concerns would be debated, and Council would in fact alter the bylaw or come up with a different version of the bylaw.
Did that answer your questions? Anything else? If not, then we've got a motion before us to accept the recommendations of the Ratings Committee. All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you for that. Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I'd like to jump ahead there and make that second motion then, that Council direct administration to prepare a single land use file including new and modified definitions for cannabis and cannabis-related land uses, and the remainder of the land use file or revisions required to enact the land use recommendations of the Cannabis Readiness Committee.
Thank you for that. Any additional comments for second reading? Sorry for my wording was wrong. The second portion, rather, for the single land use bylaw. Hopefully I haven't fully confused everyone. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. So given that we did already act on that particular item, I think we'll drop back to bylaw 400.16 for the proposed first reading of cannabis definitions. And Director Thompson, could you lead us through that?
Sure. So certainly, since Council has endorsed the committee or endorsed the committee's recommendations and directed administration to come back with one bylaw amendment to the land use bylaw that incorporates all of the committee's recommendations. This, as written, only forms a portion of the definitions, and so we are asking Council today to table this, and we will bring it forward again. We will add all of the other recommendations to the committee regarding land use, and we will bring it forward again when it's ready for that. So. We're not asking for any other action from Council regarding this item other than to table it to allow us to amend the bylaw and bring it forward.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Councillor Hoekstra.
I'll move that Council table bylaw 400.16 and direct administration to prepare a single land use bylaw amendment to enact the land use recommendation of the CRC.
Do you have any discussion on the motion to table? Seeing none, all the question, all those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. And additionally, for under bylaws, we'll go to bylaw 444. A heritage designation bylaw for the Fraser McDonald building. And Manager Bonnet, I assume you're going to take us through this item? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. We received an application to designate the Fraser McDonald building as a municipal historical resource. The designation is supported by the property owner, administration, and the Heritage Resource Committee. A statement of significance is included in the 2012 Heritage Inventory. Once a building or a site is designated as a municipal historic resource, that building or site will be preserved and protected. Specifically, the key character-defining elements outlined in the statement of significance, which demonstrates the building and its key elements, are to be protected. Any alterations must be approved by the Heritage Resources Committee appointed by Council. The building is located at 4709 49C Avenue, west of the Flatiron. The building was constructed in 1920 during a time when domestic insurance and real estate needs were rebounding after the end of the First World War. The building is valued for its modest one-story masonry construction and features classical revival style features such as the wood and the multi-panel glass storefront, brick cornice, and brick pilasters. The interior still retains some of the original features, including a large wall safe, pressed tin ceiling, and fireplace. Of particular interest is the Trans-Canada Airlines route wall map, which has been preserved on the southern interior wall. Administration is requesting council's approval to continue this designation process. And then the Fraser McDonald building will be designated as a municipal heritage resource. This designation will be registered on title and will require the owners to seek approval from the Heritage Resources Committee for all alterations to the structure. There are two motions council's being asked to grant, and that the first is to grant first reading to bylaw 444 for the designation of the Fraser McDonald building as a municipal historic resource, and that council issue notice of intent for the municipal historic resource designation of the Fraser McDonald building. And there's a period of 60 days, and then it would come back to council. Once you issue the notice of decision, notice of intent, so it would come back in August, I believe, to do all the final work on it.
Thank you for that. Just for a couple items of clarification, you said that the current owner is in agreement with this, so I'm to take it that the current owners did not in fact initiate this request.
Normally our staff, tries to talk to a number of the businesses that are the owners of the buildings that are have significance, and see if they're interested in proceeding with getting the historical designation. And in this case, the owner was quite interested, so they sign the application, and then we proceed with it.
Very good, thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Lutra.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I was going to move that council give first reading to bylaw 444 for the designation of the Fraser McDonald building as a municipal historic resource.
Thank you. And Councillor Gullickson. Yeah, you're certainly.
I'm not going to speak to that motion.
Very good. Any other comments? If not, I will ask the question. All those in favor of first reading of bylaw 444? Unanimous, thank you. Councillor Gullickson, go ahead.
I'll move that council issue the notice of intent for the municipal historic resource designation of the Fraser McDonald building.
Thank you very much. That falls in line with our previous motion. Is there any comments or questions? If not, all those in favor? Thank you very much. And given that we've got some staff here that's waiting on some items, Justin, you want to come forward? And we'll move down to our financial services item, the 2019 budget timetable. I'll have acting CAO Vaughn start this one off while you get prepared. Thank you very much.
So this evening, Justin is going to provide an example of the process that we have followed relative to developing budgets. And what we're interested in hearing from council tonight is, once we've indicated the practice that we have held, he will highlight specific elements within that. And we're interested to hear your feedback as to whether or not you wish to continue with a similar process, or you think there's other ideas that you would like us to pursue. And so Justin will provide those highlights for you. And then our hope is tonight, council will give us direction to come back in a future meeting with some new ideas or suggestions that actually meet your particular desires.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So before you have the 2019 budget timetable. It's a similar timetable as last year. So what we're really looking for tonight is direction on what public consultation you would like with the budget. The actual highlighted timetable there, everything in grey is when we'll be bringing things back to council. So historically we've done a budget survey in July, run it for a month. We've done that in the past 2 years. We asked general questions on value for tax dollars and those type of questions there. We bring that survey back to you guys on September 10th. So that's one aspect of public consultation that we do each year, and we've got the last 2 years. Also, most of you attended the public open house hosted in November after all the budget deliberations. So that's on the timetable this year. It's booked in for late November. Once again, we'll open it up to see if you want a physical open house again. Historically, we get 20 to 30 people out there to talk budget. So we did have some ideas on whether we go fully online, whether we do an online forum, or anyway, we'd like to get your ideas on that as well. So generally, the external agencies that will be presenting on October 9th again. This is brought forward due to a non-election year. And then we'll distribute the budget binders on October 22nd again. That will give you a couple of weeks before the budget workshop. The two evenings for the budget workshop. So last year we had an evening set aside for budget deliberations and one full day. So that's reflected in the blue on the actual timetable there. So that's set forth for November 7th and 8th. In looking at this year, we'd like to roll out a 2-year budget, so that being a 2019 budget and 2020 budget year. This will set us up to meet the MGA requirements for a 3-year budget rolling into 2021's budget. So I'm concerned that one full day and one evening may not be enough to get through 2 years worth of budget. So we may have to propose another date on the 13th of November, depending on council's schedule, for another evening of budget delivery. So once again, the 2019 budget will be presented at the council meeting on December 10th, and we're looking for adoption on that December 10th meeting. So that's the general run through of kind of the dates that we have done historically. I'll be open for suggestions on anything that you want to see and want to do, and so I'll just open up for questions.
Thank you, Justin. I just want to make sure I didn't hear you wrong. You said that we'll just go through to a 3-year budget process, but then there's only 2 years involved.
Yeah, so by 2021, or by end of 2019, we'll have to roll out to a 3-year budget. So that will be the 2020, 21, and 2022. So this year we'll roll out the 19 and 20s. So if we do 2 years this year, and then the following year we'll add the extra year on meeting the MGA requirements. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I am very happy to hear that we're going to start moving towards that multi-year budgeting. I think that's very important. It's going to be excellent for the community to see what it is that we have coming up, so that it's not quite such a surprise every year. I do have a question about the citizen survey right at the top there. What's the sort of uptake that we've had on that in the past?
Yeah, sorry, I failed to mention that. Last year was it was the second year that we did host it. We had 383 submissions. The year prior, I think it was around the 260. So it is gaining momentum, and then we tally the information and bring it back to you guys.
So that's actually fairly good and higher than I expected. Does council get a chance to see what the survey is going to look like before it's actually gone live?
Historically, no. We've posted the same survey pretty much in the last 2 years. We definitely can bring it back and we can make amendments to it. But yeah, if that's your recommendation or your request, yeah, we can definitely get your feedback on what you want to see in there.
I won't presume to speak on behalf of all council, but I certainly would speak in favor of having it brought to us prior to, because I have found that some of the questions, maybe not quite what I would be wanting to ask, I think it's missing the mark maybe a little bit, so I would encourage that. And then the other thing that I am wanting to comment on is the November, where are we here, the open house that we've had in the past. Sort of what you were mentioning there about perhaps looking at changing that up a little bit, maybe making it a bit more interactive. I really like that idea. I really could see a whole bunch of possibilities there to really increase engagement, because it isn't necessarily always easy or particularly attractive for people to just hop on over to the LMC kind of thing. However, if you can engage online, even perhaps there's all sorts of possibilities. So I'd like to talk about that more. So I don't really want to get all into that now because that's bogging down the details. But I would definitely encourage keeping that date as something. But I really have some great ideas on what we can do to make that a lot more dynamic and have it be a lot more useful for us.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I would like the November 7th moved ahead earlier in the week so we can allow one more evening to, in my opinion, we have several groups making presentations. It is really part of external funding, just have all of the external funding that's put out to FCSS to brought back into a budget workshop presentations, because there are some organizations that could basically fall under external funding FCSS. In my opinion, that why not just have them all? That extra $3,500 could go to another group. So that's what I personally would like to see.
CL1.
Just if I'm hearing you correctly, the October 1st date where we have all the groups come in and do the public presentation to council, is that what you were referencing, Councillor Ross?
Yeah, that was in December or November. We had that was October already.
Because it was election.
It's election year.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
But one of the sensitivities we have with the external groups is it's hard for them to come sooner because they have their board meetings and their budgets get approved in September, October. So it's quite hard on them if we push them too much ahead of that October date. But we do work closely with the groups to try and find an evening that suits everybody.
So, I believe it was Councillor Hibbs that asked the question, what was the uptake on the survey? You said 383, so 383, what's that, like 7% of households if we count it as per household kind of thing? So I mean, that's better than less, I guess, but it's not outstanding, I wouldn't suggest. I'm just wondering if council would be open to perhaps some alternate engagement strategies if staff could bring forward some ideas. I mean, I think that we're certainly open to engaging the public, but with a few of the items like our budget, they're relatively expensive and attended by relatively few people. So, I mean, I don't have any great suggestions, but I think that our staff might be able to come up with some ideas for our consideration. Let's keep in mind that this is just the way it was done in the past. There's nothing that binding us to it in the future, so something to think about anyway. Councillor Lutra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. So typically, in terms of the budget workshop, it was a day and a half, you're saying, Justin. And last year we had 2.5 days because we kind of had to chug us along. So now you're recommending though 2.5 again, just because it's a 2-year budget. Is that correct?
That is correct, and this is the first year for administration to implement a 2-year budget as well. So On the surface, I think we'll do budget line by budget line again, similar to what we did, but we'll look at the 2018 and 2019 columns, except, at the same time. So you kind of ultimately, any decisions that you push off from 2018, we can put into 2019 and try and track it that way. But definitely, you'll hopefully go through the budget once, but look at both 2018 and 2019 consecutive.
So based on that input, do we have any motions that you could direct administration to perhaps bring back some alternate engagement strategies that would be a little better use of our resources, both financial and staffing? Councillor Hoekstra?
Thanks, Mark Creasy. I'm willing to make the motion, but we've made some amendments here. I guess I was curious whether the desire is to add an extra day to the budget workshop. So is that, because then I'll say that council approved the budget 2019 budget preparation timetable as amended, or do you want the specifics in there?
CEO Vaughn?
Just thinking about council's discussion tonight, I think if we could just receive direction to come back with a renewed timeline, and within that we will develop some alternate engagement strategies. We'll think about different ways in which we can meet and how many days Justin thinks we will need to meet in order to accommodate that second year. So I think a more generic direction to bring back a refreshed budget process and timeline.
Withdraw it then? So that council would direct administration to bring back a refreshed, I like the word, refreshed budget timetable and some alternatives for public engagement.
So everybody's clear on that? The first one was withdrawn and replaced with the refreshed and approach. Any additional input? Councillor Gullickson?
By doing this, do we run into any issues with the timeline that's existing right now for July?
Who would like to speak to that? Justin, go ahead.
On the surface, I don't think so, depending on what alternatives we can bring back to you and how long they take to implement. Generally, July, August, we do that public consultation piece, and then bring that back after. So I think we've got some time, but definitely it'll be sooner rather than later that we'll put our heads together and bring back something.
Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Mayor Christine. I would agree that the stuff that we do in July, August is far more valuable than the budget open house. I always find that one of the comments we get on the budget open house is it's kind of too late. It's after the fact. You guys have agreed on the budget already. Why didn't you get your feedback? So for me, I think that piece in July, August is really, really valuable, really important. And as you suggested, we should get some other ways for feedback. The open house is, to me, it's fine if it's there, but I just find that this thing I always hear every year, that thing is, well, you guys have already decided, and why, this is just a waste of time. But let's just maybe we'll do it this year yet, but that's the feedback I've been getting over the years.
Thank you. Councillor Ross?
Just throwing on an idea for public engagement. What about Wednesday night music in the park? Have a city booth, man it as council. That there's a lot of people obviously attend that. So just an idea.
Anyone else? Doesn't look like it, so I will call for the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Yes. So what I don't expect won't take quite as long, I'm guessing. Under new business, and we've got our coffee with council summary, and who will be presenting that one? All right. TCA will go through that one as well. Thanks, Brenda.
So before council is an inventory of the comments that were collected from citizens at the Coffee with Council at the trade show. And historically what we have done is we've made record of those comments and we bring them back and we send them off to the corresponding departments. And managers work within those departments to address the ones they can address or consider the ones that they can consider within regular work rotations. We simply present these to council so you have an idea of what the comments were. And then secondly, that you understand or can see the different levels of attention that will be paid to some of the comments just based on their very nature. And so we do bring this forward each year. We do ask that council accept this as information, and you will probably see or hear comments about some of these things in other work over the course of the year. Certainly, if there's particular items or concerns that council wants to highlight for us, we're interested to hear your points of view. And with that, we could take questions.
Councillor Hoekstra.
Thanks, Mayor Creasy. First, kudos to Ross for deciphering our handwriting, because I know how I write. I've got a couple of comments, just probably due to how I had written it down. Just a second here. So, going back to comment number 32 regarding the elm tree, I spoke with that gentleman, and so I was curious about a timeline. It says administration will review this complaint, but I was curious, is there a timeline I could give that man regarding that? Is that a possibility? That's my first one.
I don't have that information for you tonight. I would have to talk with the arborist and see what their schedule is for looking at trees.
So basically, it'll be looked at this summer. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay, it's fair. Then it was number 47. Coffee with Council followed the evacuation or attempted evacuation of the Royal Oak just a couple of days previous to that. I spoke to the supervisor for the ambulance services at Alberta Health Services, and he said they would like to sit at the table for Lacombe emergency management when we're talking about plans around emergency management, that they would like to be involved with decisions going forward, because that was fortunate. It was kind of a dry run of how we handle emergencies in Lacombe with no true risk at any person, but they had to contact the city of Red Deer to get a bus, and in reality there might have been some ways to transport people right in the city, so he would like to be at that table. So that's the comment there, and his name would have been listed in the Coffee with Council book. And I had one more. Regarding number 62, a citizen wanted to make sure that council ensured that administration had access to sufficient funds to pay for positions like the CFO well. This person was well aware of the way that the city of Lacombe comes to their salary levels, that it's basically 50% of that survey. And he questioned that. He just wondered if there was some positions in our city that should be paid at a different rate in order to attract a desirable candidate. So that's where they knew this formula, but they wanted to question the formula.
Out of all the items that came forward, it's not too often we get directly asked by people to tax them more, is it? Councillor Hibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I really enjoyed this exercise. There was a lot of good feedback. I really enjoyed reading this. It was quite eye-opening as to a lot of the topics were the same, but then you get these outliers that, oh, I've never even thought of that, but obviously somebody has, so that's great. I guess the only question I have arising from this is a lot of the questions and comments had to do with various bylaws, typically more one than others, but various bylaws. So I was just wondering, if we could have an update as to where we are with, because we're short right now, we only have one bylaw officer, so if we could get a bit of an update on, where we are with that.
Very good. So I just wanted to reiterate the fact that just because items are on this particular list does not mean that they are destined for any action whatsoever. So if in fact that council sees fit, that they see some sort of action, that certainly now is one appropriate time to bring them forward. That's not to say that by not bringing them forward now that they're just dead issues, but it's, I think we could all agree it would be a little unreasonable to expect directed action on this many items immediately. See, Yvonne, do you have an idea of the items that need some further information or for some updating then?
For sure. I've taken note of the particular points this evening, and I will have to confirm with the HR manager with respect to the bylaw recruitment in order to provide you with an update on that. But certainly council may see if we are doing work on a particular bylaw or we're doing work on a particular piece of infrastructure and there's something in here that we can accommodate and should accommodate. And that is when you would see these things dealt with.
Any other additions of concern? Councillor Ross?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. I don't know if it was last year before, there was some issue with the fire pits that the fire chief had an issue with and removed them up at Mitchener. I forget the history of that. Were they put back in place or?
So the issue that you're referring to were the fire pits at the campground? And what had happened was the mesh tops were replaced with a smaller mesh to meet code or requirements. Additionally, some of them were moved because the trees had grown, and so we didn't have that 11-foot distance or whatever it was supposed to be between the flammable products and the fire. So that was all retrofitted and fixed up last year.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So given that there's a large number of items here, does council think it would be appropriate for administration to itemize these numbers as to action, no action, under consideration, whatever they term necessary? This is a public document now, so to put it out there and then simply expect it all, I think it leaves some questions in the public mind as to what's happening with all of these. What's your thoughts there? Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. Well, when I read it, I thought that was kind of the gist of it. Like, it talks about bylaw, well, it talks about how we're going to be reviewing that. I don't know, I mean, what we can do with items that support green carts and expanded recycling, noted. Well, it's noted. I don't. So, when I read this, I think we've outlined pretty well what we're doing, what we can, and in situations where we can't.
I'm sure administration will be happy to hear that. Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Mayor Creasy. So would it be appropriate then to move that action recommendation there, that council accept this as information from the resident feedback from the 2018 spring coffee with council session as presented?
Thank you for that. Any other additional comments, concerns? No? And I'll ask the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much.
Mayor Creasy, could I make a point of privilege, please? Could I request a short recess?
You most certainly can. It is 6:55. How does 7:05 sound? Will you reconvene in 10 minutes?